Hey y'all, this is Reverence for Impulse, and I'm Weena Pauly-Tarr. This podcast is my attempt to more deeply understand and explore impulse through conversations with people that inspire me. We step into connection without any planning or agenda, but with respect for the impulses that brought us here and shape how we are when we're together. I'm so glad you followed your impulse to listen in. When I think about hanging out with Nick Beem, I always feel my brain wants to get ready and wake up. And it's because Nick has this amazing way of thinking so clearly and without any kind of fuzzy interference. If Nick was an image, it would have a very high resolution, lots of pixels. And yet Nick is also super grounded and available, and he has a solid sense of humility. And he also has two awesome kids with his amazing wife, Leela, who's got to get on here soon, too. And they live in Chicago. Nick and Leela founded their yoga studio, Grateful Yoga, in Evanston, Chicago in 2010. And it's one of the few places that has survived through the pandemic and held a consistent anchor for the community. I trust Nick deeply, and I'm so inspired by the way he holds a steady gaze on what matters most. I mean, his name is Beem. Nick and I had a 5-minute authentic movement practice and then began recording. So here we go. So yeah, we just did 5 minutes of AM. You moved first, and then I moved. I'm still getting hair out of my face. How was that for you?
I enjoyed it a lot.
Yeah?
Yeah. It took me back to the theater training days. I studied in a theater school through middle school and high school that emphasized a lot of improvisational, spontaneous movement in various games, and it's a storytelling element. So it's a known pathway to just sort of turn on and let happen. And then to know I was being observed brought out a little bit of the theater feeling. Just to it felt like I was a little more aware of just how I looked from the outside. I was tracking that a little bit, not a ton. And also then some of the humor was more apparent. Like I was amused. I would think I was more amused by myself than I might have been if I was not being observed. And then watching you, I mean, I was getting so much, body resonance. Just the whatever those mirror neuron pathways are, and then my work is to watch people move and to tune to what they're doing. So it was nice to just flow with your progression and could feel my body wanting to join some of it. Some of those nice little repetitive motifs that I was feeling those come to, and then seeing you find them, that struck me. There's something just so satisfying about finding that little thing that just wants to happen a number of times.
Oh, completely. Yeah. Thank you. I was momentarily distracted when you started thinking about oh, fuck, I don't think I have recording space. And then I thought, well, I could go do it now. And then I was like, Weena, your agreement is to witness this person. So it will have to wait, which was a nice sort of internal discipline of what it means to witness somebody that I really hold it dear. And I felt the edge of that. The edge of wanting to show up in the way that I expect myself to, and then the reality of well, but this is also happening. And just all the moments that happen like that, I was reminded of. It's not, the word discipline comes in mind. It's not so much discipline. It's it's going to be okay. If you just wait. There's something about waiting. And then when I was observing you, I think once I let go of that and moved it to the side, I kind of got into what you were doing more. And the stomping, I had lots of flashes of mane and just like, oh my God, this is this person I've known. How crazy and cool
Totally.
to see him. Like, what? And so time was kind of there, and wondering about what it felt like. And I know that room, actually. I've only been there once, but like I know the floor. So little things, I felt like I had access to a kind of depth in witnessing you that I might not someone that I don't know. So that was cool. It was layered.
That is cool. Yeah.
And then doing, I feel like lately my practice has I feel like I'm getting pushed off the dock. And I'm like, oh, I'm in the water, and it's dark water, and what is the temperature? It feels like there's a lot of information when I step into practice. Maybe just because I'm not doing it enough, or I'm not metabolizing enough of what's stored up or something. But the way I felt like I could not get lost in the swirl was percussion and sound, making sound and feeling texture and place, feeling tangible place, feeling my body and hair. Those things allowed me to be inside the water of it all, but stay kind of connected instead of being swirled away. And every once in a while I was like, oh right, Nick is watching. So that would happen.
So you were saying that impulse is one of the central studies of the AM process.
Yeah. And I was just thinking right now, like, what is my impulse in this moment of this like conversation? Because as you know, I don't prep any questions. I don't read anything of yours. I try not to really think about you at all. In a loving way.
Got it.
And then to really be with what's here. And of course it takes some time, right? Because I think landing with somebody, it just takes time. So I feel like I'm just now arriving a little more into the language of being with you, but it always helps to start with body for me, as I can feel myself here a little bit more. And then the question is like, where is impulse now? Like, where is it? I feel curious. I keep thinking about when I sit and then I look at you, I have a moment of like, ooh, I want to talk to Nick about running. So that's come up, an impulse. Yeah, but I also want to make sure that I'm staying true to the moment of like what's right here, right now. So if you feel something or a question, then I invite you to just bring voice to it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, just responding to what you just said strikes me as something I end up circling around in various ways. This question of what is the present moment?
It's all
and
right.
Is it only things that just pop out of nowhere, or thoughts happen in the present moment? Also, remembering that you thought about asking me about running, well, that remembering's happening in the present moment. So does that impulse count less? I mean, there's sort of a thing that can happen with like meditative work where thoughts and memories get sort of downgraded because maybe fairly we get so obsessed with them we sort of forget there's something else, but then they are just another thing that's happening.
I would say all of that is impulse, actually. And
so then is there something besides impulse?
That's a great question. I would say the denial of impulse is something different than impulse. But although that could be an impulse in itself.
Where does the denial come from?
Maybe it's yeah, because we talk, so it's interesting that I knew we were gonna go. It's like this is gonna get really heady quick with Nick, which is good. We talk about it in authentic movement a lot in term, especially with dancers and performers, because there's often this idea that when you're doing authentic movement, you're not doing performative movement. And I think I've had strong impulses to perform in authentic movement and followed that impulse.
Right.
Right. So there is what ends up happening in all these spaces of any kind of let's focus on the moment work is this culture around what's valued and what isn't. Right. And so I think what's over and over again introduced and reminded to me is the defaults we slip into and the culture we start remaking over and over again when we come together. And so, yeah, like, oh, a memory is less of the moment than this thing I'm picking up. But no, it isn't.
Yeah.
And I want to pay special attention to the places that I start creating systems of value and operating within. Because it's not that it's bad. I think it's the only way we can sort of as humans organize what to do next is
agreed,
you know, right? And so we have to value some stuff and things move into default, and that's okay. And we're in this study of impulse. I think being really careful that I'm not starting to value a specific kind of impulse over another. Yeah.
I like the framing of things as games, you know, more than like things to get right. Have you come across James Carson's definition of finite and infinite games?
It's a book in our house.
It's out there, right?
Around. Yeah.
Yeah. I like that. I think we want to, and it's just that it's another impulse to try to close something down into a finite game. So I could just be done with this thing and know that I did it versus the open-ended, endless form game. Yeah. Which I like the idea of, but I definitely have parts that, you know, would rather have something finite to just conclude every now and then.
Well, think about like our biological need to feel success is around, I mean, that's completion. Like the felt sense is completing a thing, finishing dishes. Like to me, there's something really primal about completion and the satedness that comes with finishing a thing. And I assume it's related to some sort of survival mechanism, perhaps, maybe not.
I mean, at least in terms of satiation, like an organism does need to know when to stop eating.
Right. Or when to use the bathroom, or when you know, like those impulses and sense of being done are important markers for health and balance and aliveness. Right?
Yeah. It's one of the breath meditations I often go back to in my teaching is awareness of exhale, and just trying to know when the exhale is done leads into some really interesting spaces because it's not always clear when it's done. And there's all kinds of little impulses to try to hurry it along or stop it, or particularly if you're a little relaxed, there's often a pause at the end of exhale that's sort of like death. It's sort of threatening. So you can see that urge come to, well, it's okay, let's take the next breath. Endings, like settling into endings, definitely I think underdeveloped skill broadly in the populace, I would say, right? It's always like, what's the next? Let's get to the next.
Well, even in authentic movement, right? There's a time that ends your practice. Right? Typically the structures are built that way, but I've played a lot with like end when you're done.
How would I know? Yeah, right.
How do I
recognize?
That's because often there's time, I've done 40 minutes and there have been times where at 20, I think I'm done, but I know there's a timer coming. So it's very interesting to be inside the space of like, I feel done. Now what? I love that place. I love that, like the grindy, like pause of not knowing when it's really tangible and then having to stay there. But if the timer wasn't there, would I stop? Would I hang out? It's really hard to know if that would be my done place or what is done. What is finished, like you're saying with the exhale.
Yeah.
And it's I remember leading a workshop on what is enough. And this has been something I've been like, ooh, I want to talk to Nick about that. So maybe I do have there's a little bit of agenda. No, it's just a desire, I guess. Because when you said the exhale, I thought, well, what about the doneness of an inhale? Because that feels like a capacity limit, right? Like you could only breathe in so much air.
Right.
But it sort of leads into what I'm like gnawing on lately. And I have since I met you, quite honestly, is something called active edge. But like the edge of action and the edge of, I remember talking to Elise and Karen because I was frustrated in Phoenix Rising Yoga Therapy where we met that we were only working inside a passive edge.
Right.
And I asked them, like, what about like the contraction of a muscle and the edge of that? And they said, sure, go for it.
Yeah.
But I didn't really know how. And so in this workshop, we did like a wall sit, which everybody has their own reactions to. But it was interesting for me to wade through all the voices of this fucking sucks. I hate it. Or I'm going to be here. I'm going to be the last person sitting till everyone stands up. I'm like, whatever relationship to action or effort you have, either solo, which I think we both encounter in running all the time, but in groups and being witnessed also. I think it changes our relationship to edge, right? And that inhale feels like maybe another doorway into active edge, like all the stuff that comes up inside. Like, when is that enough? It's interesting to me. Yeah, go ahead.
Just, then my mind goes, enough for what? It becomes about intention, right? And like, what are we looking to do with?
I mean, if we're thinking of satedness, like that's enough of action, or I feel sated in the activity of that. I don't want to do more. Is it want or, I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. So that brings to mind for me, this, I think, counter, new, how to say it? A growing understanding that the notion that stress is bad is too simplistic. And in fact, we need a certain kind of stress, probably in all dimensions of ourselves, but concretely in the body, right? The bones need load. All the tissues need to be loaded. And the idea that we're protecting our joints by not loading them, right? Like this whole thing in yoga for a decade or two, you have to have the knee over the ankle or it's not safe, right?
Right.
And oh wait, actually, we're just training our knee to only feel stable in this one position.
I know.
Becoming less stable. It's like we're limiting it. So that's an interesting one, right? We need challenge. Immune system as well, right? You could probably think of examples in all dimensions. Psychologically, my kids need to be challenged if they're going to keep growing. If I just always keep them comfortable and do exactly what they want, I'm actually doing them a disservice, even though it feels so tricky as the caregiver. Like, so with ourselves, with like exercise, like what's enough stress? What's enough fire is the metaphor I often end up using in yoga contexts. Like how much heat and friction is a useful amount to stimulate growth, or just the sort of repair and regeneration of the tissue.
And who decides?
And how would we recognize that?
Because I
It's
think
probably
sometimes the personal, like that for a female body, I think those enoughness measures have been outsourced almost entirely, is what it's felt like. So reclaiming a sense of enough, or in a felt sense of me being the decider of how much to eat, also has its faults, or becomes limiting, just like the knee joint that you described, because I only have my own perspective inside that. Right. And so it's a very tricky line for me to have someone impose like, no, Weena, actually, I think you can do more.
Right.
Because I've had to like unlearn that, and then relearn an external challenge can also be a very loving gesture towards increasing capacity or resilience, but one I might not recognize. And oof, how hard is it to discern that?
Big time.
Do you play with those when you're running? Go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah. I was going to say, there's like the short-term and long-term reaction too that makes it tricky to know, because just because you feel okay afterwards one time, if you're working at a certain level of load over and over again, you may not recognize what the consequence is for a while, and then later you realize it was, that was a little bit too much. So you can't, that's the hard thing. I guess that's where, having an outside authority who's seen a lot of people train in a certain way, they can give you a little more of a sense of, on average, you can do this much at a week. So at the same time, I also love the idea that we can have our own inner authority about that kind of thing. I guess I'm just thinking, just as I think about it now, if you want to like push to run triathlon or something, you probably would do well with an outside guide who really can help you optimize like enough load, but not too much. It's still going to require you to pay attention. You still have to, just like with any expert, doctors, right? They can only do so much. You at some point have to pay attention and know how you're responding, and where you're internally like kind of cheating a little bit, or like pushing through something that hurts. There's no way around that. I'm teaching my son to run a little bit right now, and that's one of the challenges. Is I can't do it for him. I can't tell him like he's getting stitches from in his sides, and I ultimately can't really tell him how to fix that. I can give him some ideas, but he's going to have to work through it and figure out, where is he clenching, or like when is he pushing too hard, which is cool. I mean, it's the beauty of a discipline like that, is it highly incentivizes you paying attention to your body in a more honest way, because you get more honest feedback. You get like stronger feedback. Yeah.
I think sometimes I don't trust. I've over trusted my own feedback.
Yeah.
Also in a way, I don't, no regrets, I guess. I was just talking about this with Matt, that there's, like you were saying, run a triathlon. I had no lack of motivation internally to push. Like it was easy for me to drum up. I don't know if it's a dancer mentality, or I could feel extreme discomfort and can keep going. That was it was not hard to do that. And I've played with it, that edge, because I'm so curious about that. And ultimately, I have choice to do that. If I want to run till I throw up, sure, you have every right to do that. But it took a long time to learn how to value the messages that I heard, or the feedback I was giving. And then I feel like in the process of that re-education, I became so sensitive to the feedback that it was all consuming. in a way. Like I lost quite a bit of just regular life resilience in a way. And
yeah,
because I needed so many specific things. And if I was going to listen to, in running is a great example, but a little knee twinge, if that's going to stop your run, I mean,
yeah,
you're not going to run very far, because sometimes it just goes away. Sometimes it gets really bad. It's
right.
hard. I think when I saw you
is.
last, I said my left knee is a thing. Well, it's not now, but I don't
Who
I
knows
don't know
why?
why.
But
I mean, I guess I've been
yeah,
using the Theragun more, but it's not because and so the feedback, and I think the question about how to respond to the feedback is really where I will spend my energy till my dying day. That relationship to the impulse that's showing up, or my reactivity to the impulse, and what that relationship is like. Do I always follow? Do I always deny? Do I respond? Do I accompany? And I
consult the broader chorus of impulses, right? There's
ask
so
my
many different
community,
ones.
get outside myself, and do you think I could do this? Or and that starts to lead me much more towards this idea that actually our felt sense, or our bodies, are perhaps not only within our skin. But
dig it. Yeah. Say more.
no, it seems like
what's a piece of
if
that?
I'm relying on, if my discernment and relationship to impulse requires a relationship to environment and others, then in order for it to be, well, how would I end it? One that has the most truth in it. I don't know if that's what it is I'm looking for. Questioning that now. Then this idea of me as me is not really the truth, because I need all these other influences and factors to then be who I am.
Yes.
I mean, that's
because the decision to how far am I going to run regularly depends also on like your schedule and what your kids need and the weather and how often can you afford to replace your running shoes. Like so many things come together that exactly are not in your body. So yeah, it's a dance, right? Like the swing of valuing outside authority sort of, I don't know, starting in the 60s, started to swing back to like, it matters how you feel. You have access to what's true for you. You don't have to just conform. And then we've swung way farther into just, every single, I mean, this is the other thing that they would talk about with impulse. Like there's this external encouragement to follow certain impulses, right? Like to buy shit and to like look good. And like, there's we have these all kinds of urges that can get activated strategically by advertising, by politicians and all these other things. So there's also like you said, like a refraining or denying is a big piece that seems somewhat in short supply to me, at least in terms of how we engage with the machine of industrial capitalism. Like there's so much that says, just do it. Yeah, go ahead. You deserve it, right? Just follow your bliss into a choice of purchasing something. Like, so it's complicated.
And that holds a certain tempo, right? Like I think, what is it they say? Like, don't send an email at 3 a.m. or wait 3 days when you really want something. All these ways of artificially inserting a pause or slowing down, because there's not a lot of reminders in our daily life to slow down.
Yeah.
And it's funny because in somatic experiencing, it's all about slowing down, to the point that I'm like, oh, there's also value in speed, which is just my MO. Not everything has to be slow.
Yeah.
And I think about, like an extreme snowboarder going down a hill on an unmarked trail, if that's what it's called, the decisions you're making immediately are fast.
Yeah.
And your survival is really dependent on the integration of environment, body, forces, feedback. In split seconds, you're making decisions really fast. And how incredible that is. I don't know if you watched the men's US Open. I mean, the women's was more fun,
No,
but I did watch the men's also. It was grueling. And you're watching them in these split second decisions around force and impact and choices and where to put the ball. And
yeah.
And I guess part of me is like, is healing always slow? Does healing always have to be slow? Is there something healing in like that downhill snowboarding experience? When there's that much alignment between brain, body, thought, feelings. I mean, like everything's like shook in sync. What is that considered healing? Isn't that kind of what we're talking about when we say healing? Like there's coherence in the body, that there's alignment in the body. But yet it shows up in those spaces, and that's not considered. I don't know.
I guess, I mean, the snowboarder didn't start with that level of skill. It came from a lot of repetition and smaller actions that allow that level of alignment.
Instinct.
And just tuning this, it's like tuning all these different impulses to work together. And all kinds of, like you mentioned even at the beginning, how in your movement you felt like time was present, or maybe it was for me watching me. That's and that we've been circling around that notion that their impulses can arise in respect to so many time scales and from so many layers. That book, Behave by Robert Sapolsky,
I don't know,
is a really cool look at everything that influences a decision that you might make. So any one moment, like, oh, I'll just, do I stop and pick up this piece of trash off the street? You can look at like what happened in the brain in the millisecond before you did it, what's happening with your neurochemistry a minute before that, and he just zooms out all the way to evolutionary time and what influences our different priorities. And like all of that is coming to bear in each moment, where this incredible, like, these time worms that bind so much history, billions of years of evolutionary time, are all here in the words I'm choosing to speak from somewhere, right? From the layers of how I'm feeling in my seat, to what we've just been talking about, to what I was meditating on this morning, to what I've read. Like it all layers in. So it's pretty remarkable how much is behind a single small thing. And so I can feel when we do that kind of spontaneous movement practice, you get little glimpses at, I've been moving like this since martial arts, or I've been moving like this since, like, I did this other time back. It's like some of it's familiar, some of it's new. I'm preparing in about a month to lead a 6-week Phoenix Rising group for the first time in a while. And I'm presenting the whole thing as about sort of navigating uncertainty through, fundamentally it's tuning more into what feels true, what you're aware of in the moment. But as we're talking, I'm remembering there's this whole other side of my thinking that is, like we were saying a bit earlier, it isn't just about our inner experience. Like what we're experiencing is, of course, the result of the whole context that we're inside of, but at least the lens of our personal experience, or the mirror of it, is something we reliably have access to. And it is a place where lots of different information is integrated together in what's showing up. So it's a very information dense place to look for like wayfinding information. Even though it's like Indra's nets, right? It's reflecting everything else too. So we can't really call it ours exactly in the way we'd like to, but it's certainly intimately available to us. And if we tune into it more often, there's more information that we're probably not making use of that we could. Information in the broad sense, feel, somatic and feeling and all that.
I mean, if you zoom in on one of the strokes that Medvedev did or something, like if you slow down, I mean, here's where slowing down matters. And you zoom in on the foot landing and the arm, all that information you're talking about is available because now we've switched the frame of time. We've zoomed in on a specific body part. Yeah. And there is like that kind of study is endlessly fascinating. And I also maybe if I want to keep with this tennis example, but if you zoom in on that pause of that one stroke, something went off and they want to study it, right? So they go in and look very closely.
Yeah.
What is happening here? Oh, I was holding the racket a little. I mean, then you start to, is it when we slow down and we bring that kind of attention to what's happening in the felt sense or the forces that are upon us and how we're responding to them, and are we able to shift the next step, or is it only in those moments that we have choice? Does it have a lasting impact, I guess? So let's say we adjust the stroke and then you do it really slow and you're like, oh yeah, now I get it. But then in the moment that you're going in a game, are you able to access that information, or are you just living your life? Is it require that kind of focus, or is it the pattern shifted? Do you have more choice if you're in real time or in real life time?
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, my understanding of training, like Tiger Woods redid his whole golf stroke at some point, I recall hearing, and he had to leave the game for a year or two because he had to basically take all this unconscious action and make it conscious again and slow it down, retrain all his renew the neuroplasticity, repattern, and then do it enough that it became solidified into habit again. So you didn't have to think about it, right? Because if especially with complicated movement, if you're trying to micromanage it in the moment, it's not going to go well, right? So we have to go through these phases of opening the system, and it's often a huge pain in the ass, and we feel like we're losing ground. We know less. We're less clear what we want for a while, especially if we're doing it with our psyche. The process of going through therapy, going through Phoenix Rising training, you're suddenly zooming in on all this micro activity that's oh Jesus, how is this ever gonna come together into anything? But somehow then you at some point you've had enough. There's satiation with the inner quest, at least for some people, and then you recohere around some new set of patterns, and you hope they're a little more serviceable. Maybe because your environment's changed, right? I've read that the theory, this is deeply unsighted, but that running, cardio training, running, it seems to open up neuroplasticity and also rev the immune system, because the theory would be, and this is sort of one of those evolutionary just so stories, that if you're running, you may well be going into a new environment where you need to learn new landmarks, you'll encounter new stuff. So your immune system and your brain's all right, we're ready to learn something new here. So that load, it means something to run. It isn't just mechanical. It's for the organism, if you've run 5 miles, you're probly somewhere else.
You're somewhere else.
You don't usually stay in, even if you're on a treadmill. Though I'm riffing on my impulse here. I have noticed, maybe, I don't know if you have, that when I run outside, it's more intense to me than running indoors on a track.
100%.
It's so much more, I just get tired faster because I feel like my nervous system's so much more on.
It has to be, right? I mean, aren't you?
That's
I mean, you're scanning environment for safe, not safe,
right.
right? I mean, as a female body too, running, there's
Right.
often,
Well,
there's
right.
more of a charge around safe, not safe. I mean, I don't feel it that much in my neighborhood, but I have before. If I'm in a new place I haven't been and I go running, I'm very on alert,
Sure.
don't know. But that's so interesting about encouraging the neuroplasticity, because you are having to map out, think of a computer system having to map out the next environment, fill it in, fill it
Yeah.
in, fill it in, fill it in, and
Yeah.
have appropriate responses that are in alignment with your safety and survival.
Mhm.
So I
Mhm.
started did I tell you about the nose breathing? This is like, I'm trying to talk about unlearn and relearn. That was like one little thing I thought I could focus on. And my runs are quite short, but was to only nose breathe. So my mouth is
Mhm.
sealed. And I have this like little device. It's like a little plastic thing that opens your nostrils a little bit more.
Uh-huh.
Because if you do this, you're like, oh, this is so much easier to
Yeah.
breathe.
Right. Uh-huh.
Um, and it looks hilarious, which is another edge to sort of be out in the world looking like you got punched in the nose. But what it's done is it's introduced a new layer of information enough that everything is sort of having to focus, and I get tired, physically tired, maybe more quickly, but I feel so focused. So my attention is so contained because of that.
Mm.
It's really interesting. So there's something, I mean, this unlearning process, don't you think there's sort of a cultural unlearning happening, like a pulling apart and like
Oh yeah.
laying out to bear, like what, and a desire to sort of rebuild and renegotiate what our value systems are and how we're rebuilding patterns.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, but it's disorienting. It can be exciting. It can be, I think the lack of containment, maybe that's why it's so sating for me to nose breathe, because easily I can experience so much undoing that it's hard to feel containment and structure. And something about that one thing brings in that feeling in my body of, I like
Mm.
structure too. I'm somebody who really loves it. What about you?
Yeah. Yeah. I like uh repetition of patterns. I've been playing with candle meditation. Just
Hmm.
like holding gaze on a candle flame recently, just as an impulse. And I've never really tried it before. It's really quite interesting to see. You get very immediate feedback when your attention's wandering, because your visual field starts to blur. Like the image of the candle will start to
Oh,
defocus, and you just see very viscerally how your visual system wants to shift and move around. And I can even feel it in the neck, rotate
mm.
the head rotators, which are reflexively connected to the eyes. Like as the more I relax and settle my gaze, the more my neck releases. Um, it's been a cool study. And then the second piece is then you close your eyes and try to hold the after image and stabilize. This is called the fire kasina practice. It's a Buddhist concentration practice. So it's an interesting structure, just to decide, like, I'm going to just do this one thing, and then it so much constellates around that decision that you then get to be aware of. And often, at least in a concentration practice, it means practicing denial of other impulse, to just choose over and over, choose this one thing is happening, and politely, if possible, turn aside all the other impulses. Right? That's been my one of my long-term meditation learnings. Is like, if you try to just like cut down all the other stuff aggressively, then it just, then it just gets angry and comes back for you. But there's a certain sort of etiquette of choosing one over the other that seems to make it go easier.
It makes me wonder, what is your concentration practice or focus practice for?
That's a great question. Or for any practice. I was thinking about that earlier too. Like, if you want to push yourself really hard, like, why, right? What is it gaining you to make any particular commitment, or like take up any particular challenge? Right now, for me, it's feels like counterweight to some of the other. I've been preparing for this Phoenix Rising series, so I've been doing a little more of the just like open sitting and like letting things come through and circulate. And this has been a counterbalance. And also I've been interested just broadly in the elements and the sort of essence of the elements. I've been doing this nature guiding work for the past year and a half. And when we're out in the woods, there's a lot of water and earth and wind, but not that much fire. So it's been interesting to really also tune into that felt presence of fire. I don't think I'm going to do a ton of it. There's Locke Kelly. You come across the teacher Locke Kelly. He teaches this style of mind. He calls effortless mindfulness, which is almost it's distinguishing between like focusing on something by holding yourself there muscularly versus more like resting in spacious awareness and just letting attention be with something. It's like a visceral difference between trying to pin your attention down and just letting attention be there. And he theorized that for a lot of the meditative traditions that emphasize concentration practice, they were working with a population of people who didn't need to have such tight focus in their daily lives. Whereas in the West, we've been through the educational system. Most of us who've gone through it have learned to focus pretty damn well. Just to get through high school and college, you end up having to discipline your mind pretty strongly just to pass through all those hoops. So in his view, like, it's less necessary for a lot of his students. That like they can concentrate well enough. Like if you can like write a 3-page paper or get through a bunch of bureaucratic forms to like take out a building permit, you probably have enough concentration overall. It's actually more the relaxation and like spacious quality that is probably more called for.
It also occurs to me the difference in, like our biology and in focusing is, in survival response, you have wide focus, you hear a rustle of leaves, and your eyes close. Your vision narrows, right, to pinpoint and focus. And how you also need to be on the hill looking broadly at all of the land to see any variation in pattern as an indication. So there's also this broad view and perspective, which can be restful, or it can be more about taking in anomaly.
Right.
But it's funny, as you're speaking, and even with the candle, I was thinking, we talk about different ways of witnessing an authentic movement. And there are times where you're really like the person is the flame and you're just completely focused on that person's body and movement. And there are other times where it's a body in space and this whole room is there and there's lights and action outside and you're part of the city block. And there's a much larger view of taking in this moment of someone moving and being alive within this larger context, and how it seems beneficial to have range and agility in both of those, right? Like for different reasons. Yeah.
And to notice
it's interesting to think
stuck
culturally.
in one of them. Oh yeah. Too.
Yeah.
I would share that our yoga therapy mentor, our shared mentor, Barry Courtney, something he said during the training that is always comes back to me almost every session I give, is just that, when you find yourself getting really like pulled into someone and like their process, like just look away, just look around the room, maybe yawn. Like,
Yeah.
you can ignore them for a while. Like they
Yeah.
don't need you to be like pinned on them the whole time. Like,
Yeah.
thanks.
100.
Like,
Yeah.
just
So
yawn
much.
a little bit, like let your mind get distracted for a while. Because I was like coming to it with such high standards of like, this is a meditation where I will have unbroken concentration.
Yes.
It's like, no, just
Yeah.
zone out for a bit.
I remember that's exactly the same advice he gave me, because I have an intensity towards engagement. And he was like, Weena, just like relax back a little bit. But the permission to look around, I mean, that's profound to me. I can feel that as a mover when somebody's witness is that intense. I'm a little like, back up. Like, you know what I mean? Like it's too, the expectation of meeting that kind of intensity is a lot to bear.
It is.
And so there's something, and that's particular maybe to me, but having a more spacious witness allows more expansion for me, more possibility, more choice. But I do think that's in particular to like, that's a rebalancing for me. That might not be true, right? For another person.
Right. And it may vary with context too.
Exactly.
Like some places we get easily fixated, and other places we just are skirting and sort of avoiding the direct thing. It makes so hard to give any advice broadly to anyone about anything. It's like, again, we got to just see how it is in there, like start to take it up for ourselves, and like find in Buddhism they call it the eye of the Dharma, like having the inquiry alive in you is sort of the fundamental thing. Like, you can read all the books you want, and you can have the best teacher in the world, but if you haven't awakened, it's the way seeking mind, I think they call it. That impulse to just keep exploring and wondering and not just settle into any fixed answer is almost like that's the heart of it. Yeah. Like we're doing here. Yeah. Just dancing around.
I think when I think of my kids, that seems like the hardest part to do that. When I have my kids, like the narrow focus can come in really intensely with my kids, right? And also just a deep, when there's a lot of love there, it's hard not to move towards a more direct, like intense gaze, because there's desire to connect and desire to know, and
a lot invested, right?
And it's beautiful, and you're like, what's gonna happen? Who are you now? I feel like that almost daily with like, what is it like to be you? And there's also, some Instagram thing popped up that somehow my sound was on. It usually wasn't. And I got swept into a woman. She said, when I was a kid, I would get in, there was a carpool. And if you were in my car, you'd get in and my mom would hammer away with the questions. Who did you see? What did you sit at lunch with? And she said, I would go with my friend's mom. She didn't say a fucking word. She gave us cold iced tea and ignored us, and nobody said anything. And she said, I loved it. And I was like, oh God, I'm so not that mom. I mean, I would say there are long moments, stretches of silence together that I'll feel and think, oh, here's that open space, that open view. But I think there's an intensity there. I could recalibrate maybe.
Yeah. I think broadly these parenting urges are, often a counter move from how we were parented.
Exactly.
Right. So you get the
history, the time that you mentioned, all the time that's informing the impulse.
Yeah. And so you get these ripples of compensation and like anti-compensation sort of
Totally.
oscillating through the generations.
Through so many generations.
So many. Yeah.
Yeah. How are you doing on time? Are you okay?
Yeah, I should probably wrap up in a bit. Yeah.
Well, I want to ask you about, so you're doing a Phoenix Rising group. Is it outside?
This will be indoors.
Indoors?
Yeah.
And how does it work? Is it like 8-week?
I'm going to do 6 weeks.
Okay.
To kind of see if there's that level of commitment is workable for people these days. I'm still trying to recalibrate to like what people will be able to kind of sign up for and make time for. And then 1 4-hour weekend sort of mini retreat. In the past, I've done 8 weeks with a full day retreat at a like farther away, but this will just be at the studio. So test the waters with that.
Is it once a week? Is that what you said?
Yeah, Monday nights. Yeah.
That's cool.
6 Mondays. Yeah. It feels it's a little nerve-wracking to put out the big program. It's like,
yeah,
I'm gonna have a party. Does anyone want to come?
Oh, I think
to
it's
my
so
party?
good that I know. Please come to my. I think it's so good to be doing in person. That's something I'm really trying to understand more is how do we gather?
Yeah.
How do we gather again? Like that muscle is so atrophied, and it's not in a bad way either. Like when gathering was default, it was hard to say no. It was hard to, make that sort of private, quiet time or have permission around it the way I feel people do have now. And I also feel a real deep hunger to be in spaces with people, tangibly with people.
Yeah.
But there's also, people's time is really valuable. I think that's been called forward, like,
right.
And so what they choose, how people choose to gather feels really intentional. So I'm curious about how do we get people back together in ways that don't feel depleting or like they're overextending themselves or
with I think a discernment piece of like, is it a useful edge to lean into again? Because it's sort of always easier not to go out. It's always easier not to do the thing. So where does the motivation come from? Again, where does that like, how much loneliness does it take to recognize we actually have to go back and meet each other? Or at the beginning of the pandemic, one of my big concerns, other than all the obvious ones, was just, are we gonna settle for this with everything on Zoom? Is this going to become like, my dad said this really insightful thing. Is it going to be like how it used to be? If you wanted furniture, you had to like get handmade furniture, and then mass furniture and IKEA came along, and most of us realized we'd rather just have okay furniture that's much easier to get and cheaper than like lovingly handmade furniture. And is that what like in-person experience is going to become, the like handmade furniture option that a few people want to sustain and everyone else settles for like, Zoom, it's good enough.
Right.
Like I saw an advertisement for someone, and this is not to denigrate what she was doing. It was her whole business model was around like, we need to go back to in-person community. Here's an online training for how to create more in-person community in your local place by like, it was a cool idea of like renewing old skills, like old ways of making food and handcrafting things, and like create a community around that. But sign up for my webinar to learn how
I'm not going to do it yet, but you guys, I can help you do it. I mean, I'm trying to gather, I'm interested right now. Something I'm experimenting with is a hybrid structure, which even saying the word, I'm like, bleh, that's like immediate fail, right? Because we know what hybrid school looked like. It was garbage, right?
And it totally was. Yeah.
Like bring the laptop to school for the kid who's not there. What? Yeah, no, terrible. But I also think I think the future holds hybridity much better. And I think like when you think of I mean, it's sort of fun to think of hybrid creatures and hybrid. I mean, hybrid is really exciting, actually. So I'm curious if is there a way, and my fantasy right now is, the Star Wars hologram that pops up and talks to you about like this new information that you need. And then you're with the people that go find it. That, it's like, it's less about being with and more about exchange of ideas or communication and then that's integrated into a 3-dimensional experience with other people. And so I'm playing with this, like in Rooted, we're trying a sort of experiment of gathering little pods together who see an anchor workshop online, but then are with each other discussing it. And I think that can be really, I think that could really work. We do it with movies. We've been doing it for a long time. A movie is a hybrid structure. You're watching this thing, you all experience it together, and then you talk about it endlessly after. So we know it can work. The theater and the way that, it's like any sort of performance experience that's maybe through a screen, is how well that's done matters a lot, I would say, right? Like also your willingness to sort of enter in to the experience and also integrate that into your life experience. So there's some bridging that needs to be tended to, but I think it's possible.
It's almost like the work you spend traveling physically to a place and showing up every day has to be replaced by almost like some ritual in like consecration work of your space. And like, this is no longer my mundane house. It's the place where I'm learning, and I have to actively put these things into use in my life. It's not going to be done just by showing up in person. You're sort of like voluntarily like trapping yourself in a situation where you have to like have an experience, but it becomes more on you if it's just the online thing, especially if you're going to get the recordings, or if it's like a do your own course kind of thing.
That's hard. I find, and it's also selfishly, I'm not a great independent learner. Like I really learn so much with people. Yeah. I need other people around to really absorb stuff. I can read it, but I'm going to get more if I'm with someone. I know somebody who used to, in the pandemic, when a breakout room would happen, they would go to a different room in their house to do the breakout room.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I was like, that's brilliant. Yeah, just changing location.
Right.
How our bodies respond to it. It's like you have to have more buy-in. I mean, that's what makes it possible for me to really be with you, is I have total buy-in that I'm with you. Right? Like I'm not thinking about that now. I am, because I'm saying it, but you're on my computer and there's a screen. But I wasn't 5 minutes ago. And that theater, like the imagination, our ability to enter in, we can use, I think. I mean, it's also terrifying.
It's almost it's like an act of magic.
Yeah.
We're all becoming more adept magicians with all of this.
It's not that different to me than a good book. You enter into another realm, right? These portals, and learning how to be skilled at moving in and out or between will be something to learn.
And how to still come back to the body. That seems to me like, it's one of my missions here, I think, is what a yoga studio can offer, what an authentic movement is like. No, like we also now even more deliberately have to practice remembering that we're bodies in space in 3D reality, and like to like counteract some of the negative effects on the nervous system and the animal self that doesn't understand what all this technology is.
The disembodiment. I mean, it's an interesting study. This might be our next podcast, but like I feel such a strong judgment around virtual reality or augmented reality and entering in and how it affects the body. And I don't want to be a naysayer. I want to understand more what's happening there. But when you put on the goggles and you're on the edge of a building and your whole body reacts. I mean, interesting and amazing. And also what are the effects of tricking your animal? Maybe there aren't any, but I'd like to know. I guess I feel curious about the effects of it. Like you said, long term, we won't know. But I think hybridity is going to be, like it or not, sort of where we head with that. We will, even our own bodies will become hybrid forms of technology and organic matter.
Right. Or more so than they already are, right? Because arguably we're already doing, I got contacts in,
Yeah. Yeah. Stitches. Yeah.
Yeah. This is another whole conversation that beckons in this line, because there's a lot of, I have a lot of thoughts about all that.
Mm-hmm.
Related maybe just shortly to the question of impulse and like the following versus the value of sometimes saying no. And the whole flood of tech development is all premised on just say yes. Like, just trust the technology. It's always good. It's always progress to have more and better communication. And there's like that, like you said, I don't want to be a naysayer. Why don't you want to be a naysayer? Right. Because we know the naysayers, like people hated, the printing press. So look at that. Look at those assholes.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Boomer. Right. Like that starts to,
like, God forbid we ever question the march of like technological progress.
Yeah.
Well, it happens to align with the profit motive of all the tech companies. So of course I think we're obliged to ask questions about all these narratives. But yeah, I go back and forth. Like, I do this work in nature, and yet I also love sci-fi and like the unbounded potential of what may evolve is exciting to me too. So
and if change is the only constant, are we becoming as we age, and I think it is sort of important, an important function as aging into elderhood is being more conservative, because I think it is important. The gift of an elder is the voice of caution, or slowing down, or taking your time, or questioning more, maybe. And that's a good thing.
Enough hype cycles, like, to be like, this is a hype cycle. Like, I've seen this, right? This is, you think it's the world changing thing, but it's just, there's been a lot of these. So
yeah. This has been so delightful, Nick. I don't know that we've ever really sat and done this.
I don't think so. If even if you never publish it, it would be very worthwhile.
Yeah, completely. Yeah. Well, thank you for taking time to show up and hop into this unknown space. I didn't know you had a theater background. Now I'm like, oh, we got to talk about performance too.
Totally.
Yeah.
It's been a deep pleasure.
You can learn more about Nick's upcoming 8-week program, Finding Your Way, Yoga Skills for Navigating Uncertainty, on his website, gratefulyoga.com. And you can find his writing in his Substack, Within Us and Without Us. And if you're in the Chicago area, do yourself a favor and check out their beautiful studio. Thank you so much for listening with us. Until next time.